The story, I heard the story from the man himself, and the end happened after anyone ever. There was a man that was born in America, in Cleveland. He was Jewish, but he was not from, and his name was Stuart Mintz. And his father was also born in Cleveland, and his father, Nebuch, was also not from. His grandfather was a bricklayer in Russia. He came to America, he moved to the Cleveland area, and he went through a number of jobs, like a lot of you did, because he couldn't find a job that would employ him on Shabbos, and then he opened his own business, construction type, because he was a bricklayer, and he did very well. But unfortunately, like many Yidden in that time, this would be early 1900s, very early, about the beginning of the century, he was unable to keep his children from. So this Stuart Mintz grew up a third generation kind of Clevelander, and his grandparents were from, his parents were not. They went to some Shabbos Sudas, and they were not from with a strong Jewish identity. I don't know what that means exactly, but let's say if you eat a cheeseburger, you put in a matzo ball. So that way, and they went to shul on Yom Kippur, and they didn't know what to do there, and that's the way he grew up. He got married, he had a family. 1980s now, and he was born in the 50s. This grandson is now 1980s, and he got a good deal on a trip to Eretz Yisrael with a few other non-from conservative type, but not really even affiliated friends. And they figured, hey, for this, it was a deal from the, I forgot what you call it, that plants the trees around Eretz Yisrael. Right, yeah, so they made a deal so people should come. So these couple of fellas, they went to Eretz Yisrael together. And by this time, the cheeseburger probably only had a half a matzo ball in it. So they're in Eretz Yisrael, and they discover that there's a problem. They're staying in a hotel in Yerushalayim, and Shabbos morning, there's absolutely nothing to do. There's no bars open, there's no coffee shops open, and they're sitting around bored. So finally, someone had the idea to do the last possible thing that they could possibly do, and he said, hey, why don't we find a shul? So they said, fine. So they started walking out of their hotel. They didn't know where exactly to go. They walked past probably a bunch of shul. They walked around 45 minutes. And they found a shul, and they walked in. But then they didn't want to make a scene in the shul. So they had an idea, and they went upstairs to the balcony, which is not a good idea. Don't try this at home. Like, hey Bill, did you know in Orthodox synagogue, only the ladies come to services? That's fascinating. So they're walking around the balcony, and not only the ladies come to services, but they're giggling a lot for some reason. And these fellas, they walk over to the edge of the balcony, and they look into the main shul, because that's what they came to see. And wow, there's the men. Stuart, come over here. And I guess they still didn't figure out exactly. So Stuart walks over. He walks over to the balcony, and the balcony ends right in the middle of the shul. He looks straight down, and he's looking at the bima, and they're in the middle of Kriyas HaTorah, and it's right beneath him. And all of a sudden, it's a strong, powerful emotion. And he doesn't know exactly why, but it hits him that the way the people right beneath him reading the Torah look, that's the way shuls looked since the Beis HaMikdash, and he's not part of it. And this, he couldn't get this out of his head. So the trip ended, and he went back to Cleveland, and he got in touch with different rabbis. He became very close with Rabbi Nussbaum-motzei, who was the Rav Ar Chodesh down the street, which I don't think that building's there anymore. I don't know exactly where it was, a couple blocks down. And he also went to the beginners minyan in Taylor Road Synagogue, which was at that time led by Dr. Stuart Chesner. And he slowly became from, his family became from, and he eventually, when Stuart Chesner moved to Eretz Yisrael, he took over the beginners minyan, and that would have been a fine story. But there's more. 10 years later, Stuart Mintz is schmoozing with his dad, who was very accepting of this. He had grown up in a frum home, and his dad said to him, look, Stuart, what hit you when you were in your 30s to turn your life over? What was wrong with the matzo ball? Why change your whole life? What was it? So he says, I'll tell you the story when it's telling to the show. So his dad said, I'll tell you a story, Stuart, that you never heard. Really, you have a strong connection to the Sefer Torah. Why? Because when you were a child, a newborn, you had some type of blood disease. And we didn't know if you would make it. We didn't know what to do. And all of a sudden, your grandma Mintz was home, and there's a knock on her door. It's a rabbi with long payas. And he says, hello, my name is Rabbi Menachem Mendeltaub. And I have a shtibel here in Cleveland. And we have to borrow a Sefer Torah every week. And we're looking to buy our own Sefer Torah. Could you contribute toward the Sefer Torah? And Mrs. Mintz, who was a frum yid from Rosh Hashanah, she said, how much is the whole Sefer Torah? And at that time, he said, a used Sefer Torah that we're looking at is $3,000. She said, you know what? I'll give you a check for $3,000. B'schus my Eidekol, who's not well, should have a refuah shleima. Gave her a bracha, and she gave him the check, and Baruch Hashem, you survived. So, it was really a Sefer Torah that helped you live. So Stuart Mintz went, and he was closer to Gifty. He told the story to Gifty, and Gifty said, yeah, of course. I remember that Maisa. That Rabbi Menachem Mendeltaub lived in Cleveland for a few years. He's known as the Kalavar Rebbe. He was a big tzaddik. And I remember the Maisa that Gittel Mintz paid for the Sefer Torah for their shul. Everyone was like very impressed. It was a big mitzvah. And Stuart Mintz almost fainted. He said, you know what? The shtibel that I went to in Eretz Yisrael was the Kalavar shtibel. So it came back that there's Kalavar shtibel. And that would be an amazing mice. But there's more. And what happened? Rabbi Yoel Gold got a hold of this Maisa, and he said it all over the place. And then last year, after Rabbi Gold said it for a bit, Stuart Mintz gets a voicemail that he missed. And it says, hello, I'm needing to speak to you. This is the Kalavar Rebbe from Eretz Yisrael. I need to speak to you. Your phone is always taken. So Stuart Mintz calls back the Kalavar Rebbe, and the Kalavar Rebbe told him, I want to tell you something. There was one Sefer Torah that came from the Kalavar Shtibel in Cleveland, Eretz Yisrael. And for the entire 1980s, every single Shabbos, that was the Sefer Torah that they used. So Stuart Mintz was very nisragish. He said he felt like his grandmother jumped out and sent him a message. He went to Israel. He has a picture with that Sefer Torah that's now over 100 years old. But for us to remember is that this Mrs. Gittel Mintz, who no one ever heard of, that lived in Cleveland, and tzaddik came to her door with the opportunity for a mitzvah, and she didn't just do the mitzvah, she knocked it out of the park. And Baruch Hashem, her Eidekol survived. But she died with no frum family. She didn't know that 30 years later, this Sefer Torah that she paid for schlepped the heart of her Eidekol, that this Sefer Torah was connected, out of his hotel, 45 minutes, up to the shul, and then knocked his head and grabbed his heart and schlepped him into Yiddishkeit. So sometimes a mitzvah that we do could produce much, much later on, and we should keep that in mind when mitzvahs come to us.